5G in a zero distance world. I'm Tanya Hall for ZDNet, and joining me is Dr. Bami Bastani. He is the Senior Vice President of the RF Business Unit at Global Foundries. Welcome, Bami.
Hi, Tanya. Glad to be here.
So, what is Global Foundries and what is your role there?
Global Foundries is a full service semiconductor wafer foundry. We basically sell those round things. And we provide full end-to-end solutions, including working with the customers from the IP that they need to design help that they need through our PDKs to the end wafers, and at times we extend that to test and even tape and reel and package parts. So a very full service end-to-end solution provider for the semiconductor industry.
5G took center stage this year at Mobile World Congress, and it's exciting. We're all excited about it, but what were the biggest takeaways from the conference?
Well, Tanya, the biggest takeaway was it is happening. You know, sometimes you talk about things, but the amount of hardware, the amount of demonstration, the amount of software, the amount of applications on display was phenomenal. And then these were both small, which there's a lot of hub of new innovations, to like Anoki Wave, and large, like the traditional Nokia, Ericsson, Intel, Qualcomm. It was fascinating to see the plethora of innovation coming through this, what I call the mobility changing the world, and then 5G as the driver.
Well, when we say 5G, there's a millimeter wave and sub-6 gigahertz. What is the spectrum that we're talking about here, really?
So 5G is evolving. And in terms of also introduction timing is evolving. So when we talk about 5G, I would like to segment that into two spectrums. One is sub-6 gigahertz. As we know today, our 4G, which is LTE, LTE plus, LTE advanced, is basically where our, like when I look at my iPhone today, that's where it is. This is like the iPhone 10, by the way, or Samsung, or any of them. That's the workhorse today. We're taking that spectrum to between 3 and 5 gig, and now we're pushing it, by the way, to 6 and maybe a little bit over 6. These are evolutionary steps from 4G, giving us those high data rates. 5G, by the way, as opposed to 4G, 5G is more of a data-centric approach, internet-centric approach to the industry. While when you're doing a huge amount of video streaming, when you're doing cryptocurrency even, the amount of data that gets flowing, when you're doing virtual reality, when you're doing augmented reality, when you're doing your self-driving cars, the amount of edge-to-edge connectivity or edge-to cloud connectivity, the amount of data that gets transitioned is great, and that's 5G. So first of all, I want for our viewers to understand 4G and 5G will coexist. 5G is not there to replace 4G. 5G is to bring you that 1 to 10 gigabits per second capability that we don't have today. And a lot of your voice calls and your videos and things like that still is going to be depend on 4G and LTE. Now, sub-6 is the first implementation, like I said, from 3 point something to 4 and 5 gigahertz. And it's evolutionary to our 4G today. Then you get to millimeter waves, which are standards. New standards are coming every day, but they're pretty much getting firmed up. For example, we see in US 28 gigahertz and 39 gigahertz by big carriers, people like Verizon, like T-Mobile, like Sprint, like AT&T. For millimeter wave, now because your frequencies are changing, are getting larger, your wavelengths are getting smaller, you're becoming a lot more line of sight versus 4G where you're looking at your towers, kilometers away. So millimeter wave, the first application, for example, we see is going to be the last mile. Do I go fiber the last mile, Or do I put one of my 5G millimeter wave, 28 gigahertz, and broadcast that last mile? Well, that's got huge power, not only in US, which is a developed economy, but also in developing economies where you don't have copper wire running or fiber running and things like that. So millimeter waves to first order is addressing an infrastructure play, while the sub-6 is addressing the more of the mobility play that we have. And the first implementations have been more around sub-6 gigahertz, and the upcoming are a millimeter wave to get that backhaul going, point-to-point going, the last mile going. Now, the good news, Tanya, again, I'll go back to your first question about Mobile World Congress, is that we see all of those schedules are getting pulled in. Generally, when you deal with new technologies, things, yeah, it's at that date and going to get pushed out because something is not ready. The Olympic Games, accelerated that. We see the implementations in the stadiums, in the Super Bowl, everywhere that we see, there have been catalysts to increase that speed of implementation. And of course, that's wonderful for us techies that love to see new things coming and changing everybody's lives.
So why is microcircuitry innovation critical then in enabling this transition to 5G?
So first of all, as you know, let me go back to Moore's Law. Every 2 years, we are increasing roughly by 2x the complexity, the density, and ability to address the evolving standards and the speeds that we need. So from the processing point of view, when you say I want to get over gigabits per second, you have to process a lot of data. When you say I have to have virtual reality and have zero latency, because if you have got like more than 1 millisecond or 2 milliseconds, you're going to get seasick in your goggles, and you don't want that. Or when you say I'm going to be in era where autonomous driving, I have to have edge-to-edge communication between my cars. So I don't even have a red light or a traffic light anymore because there's intelligence built at the edge. Cars communicate to each other. We're now looking 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, and they give priority to each other. They can't be any delays in terms of communication. So there's big consequences to when you're moving massive amount of data. So on the processing side, that's why the technology needs to move from 14 nanometer to 7 nanometer and beyond. That's the processing side. On the RF side, where it's very dear to my heart as Senior VP for RF Business Unit, everything in it has and will have complex radios with huge amount of bands. By huge amount of bands, around 2000, we had like 2 bands and we're happy about it, or 3 bands, happy. Today, our 4G phones have got roughly about 30 bands to 40 bands, and with 5G, we're going to double that. So what's the utility of doubling those bands? We can use then carrier aggregation. We're bonding these different bands together to put massive amount of data wirelessly coming down to you and go out from you. We call it downlink and uplink. Now, in doing that, then we're coming with new technologies in terms of MIMO moving to massive MIMO. Instead of spreading ubiquitously, we're forming beams. We call it beam forming. And then our antennas, instead of being these big, huge things, because now the wavelengths have become smaller as the frequencies get larger, now we have antennas which are built on phased arrays. Little antennas in a phased array, whether it's 4x4, 8x8, and even in terms of processing, we're going to 256 QAMs and then above. And so all of this means that I have a smaller arrays. I need more RF technology in terms of power amplifiers, low noise amplifiers, switches behind each of these antenna elements. And that's also drive explosive growth around our RF technologies. Now, you put the digital side of the world, processing, and RF side, which is like front-end modules and fully integrated systems together, you come up with these more advanced, what you call it, microelectronic circuitry that are moving to the next level to give us that 10x advantage over where we are today.
It sounds like you're talking about a lot of challenges then in from the manufacturing side and from those devices that we're going to expect to do this. So what are some of the things and some of the challenges that are behind seamless access to 5G? I don't know if at home, maybe at work, or even for smart cities.
So, by the way, you have seen a lot. Let me go back to the cities first and big metropolitan areas. We talked about the millimeter wave is more of a line of sight. Think about at the corner of each street, each block, you will have communication between corner to corner at the millimeter wave, processing massive amount of data, cars going through it, communicating with those antennas, millimeter wave, people walking, communicating through it. That's why the spread of 5G starts from metropolitan areas. And that's why you see, announcements by all major carriers for all major cities, from New York to Dallas to San Francisco to, you lose count, because everybody sees it's a great fit for them to be on the leading edge of networking. Now, there are a lot of, you said social implications. This is interesting, we are used to, in our generation, internet was instantaneous data. now we're changing that instantaneous information from data to information. We're bringing artificial intelligence to the machinery. And then I'm going to a little bit go far afield. You cannot teach ethics to your machines. Ethics are human. So then the question is that how we are training our children with access to these virtual reality and massive amount of information to make ethical decisions for those machines and guide those software development. I think it's going to be, from a social impact, a very, very interesting era that our technology is enabling us to think about the future and the implication of it.
I know this hasn't deployed yet, and we're hoping maybe by the end of this year we'll see 5G. But are you already planning for, I don't know, 5, maybe even 7 years down the road, and what you need to do to be ready for the next level?
Well, the peak, I would say, of 5G as it will translate into your handset and mobility and getting to those 10 gigabits per second speed probably is around 2022, 2023. I say peak. So that's a progression of working to that level. And going back to at Global Foundries, we both have the digital technologies, RF technologies in our multiple fabs, from New York to Vermont to Dresden to Singapore, and now the new fab as well for China to look at the China market. So we're putting massive investments to see through that. But it's not just about the wafer foundry. It's not about making the fab wafers. It's about the design enablement. It is about the intellectual property that we bring to customers to accelerate their time to market. It's about benchmark circuits that our customers could use. So those are the areas that we are heavily investing at Global Foundries to position ourselves and our customers to participate fully in the developments and be ahead of the game.
Well, I really appreciate your time taking out to explain this very complicated new way of saying being in a zero connected world. And if somebody wants to connect with you, Dr. Bami, and they want to find out more about your work, how can they do that?
So on LinkedIn, so you could look at me at Bami Bastani. Also, you can reach at me at my email, which is bami.bastani@globalfoundries.com.
And thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And if you want to follow me, you can right here on ZDNet or Tech Republic, or maybe find me on Twitter at Tanya Hall Radio on Twitter, or on Facebook by searching for The Tanya Hall Show. Until next time.